One of my favorite Goya paintings comes from Quinta del Sordo, which means House of the Deaf Man. This was a house that he bought in rural Spain when he was about 75 years old. And he was depressed, he was down, he was miserable, he was angry. It's a really bad time in his life. So what Goya did is he purchased this home, went out there, and he created some of his darkest paintings. In my opinion, they're some of his greatest works. So my favorite one is Saturn Devouring His Children. And the reason why these paintings are so incredibly powerful is because they still connect to us today. We can still kind of relate to them, we can understand them, and we can feel that emotional, powerful response that he's trying to get, that most of the romantics during this time period were trying to stir up, get people to think about different situations differently, different stories differently, contemporary events differently. It was a really, really, really great time in art historically. So this is one of his 14 different paintings that he did out at Quinta del Sordo. So according to mythology, Saturn was believed to have had a premonition that said one of his children was going to dethrone him and take all his power away. Well, Saturn was not having that because he wanted that power. He needed the power to survive. So what he decided to do was to kill all of his children by eating them one by one. So in the visual language throughout history, we have seen this represented time and time again by different artists. So if we look to the right here, you can see an example of Saturn Devouring His Child done by Peter Paul Rubens, who was a Baroque painter. Now, when we look at Peter Paul Rubens' version, you see an older man. He's nude. We have a lot of attention on his anatomy, right? He's very muscular. You see his bones and his skin, and everything works really well. And he looks like a normal human, right? Then he's holding this cute little chubby baby who looks obviously horrified that his father is ripping the flesh off of his bones. So when you look at the difference, you can tell that these two paintings are done from entirely different times in history and entirely different movements. When we go back to the left and you look at what Goya has done with Saturn, he's changed the way Saturn looks visually. So on the right, a little bit more traditional. We see him as a man. On the left, Goya makes him a monster. Goya, as all romantics did, they focused on the darker recesses of the mind. They wanted to focus on the irrational qualities that humans have, right? You all have times in your life where you're very rational, and then you all have times in your life where you're totally irrational. Maybe you just go off the chain. So Goya is capturing that, and he's a part of this movement that tend to do that. They want to approach a subject matter from a different perspective. Mythology has been represented in literature, obviously, and of course in the visual language in a variety of ways. This painting does not represent a man eating his child. This painting and the myth is a metaphor for this idea of having too much power, that you're uncontrollable. You need that power so much, that power feeds you. And it's a very irrational way of thinking. So when we go back to Goya's version of Saturn, we see this crazed skeleton of a monster with bulging eyes and gray hair kind of stumbling into our space, right? And he's like hungry, and it's like a frenzy that he's so hungry, and he's holding on to this fleshy body, and he has one arm, up in his mouth, and there's blood everywhere, but he's just crazed, and all he needs to do is to feed that hunger of power. So according to mythology, one of his sons, Jupiter, did escape and then ultimately comes back and dethrones his father. So what this story does is it sticks with us because it's showing that having power is a privilege, but you can let power go to your head. You can let power overtake you, and you become this frenzied, irrational soul that cannot be controlled. So Saturn Devouring His Son by Goya is one of my favorites because you still relate to it. We all have moments like this. It's as simply as I always think of, a lot of different things when I see this. I always think of food. I don't picture him actually eating, his child. But I do think about maybe some fried chicken, when you get really hungry. I also think of my husband when I see this painting. I love it because, when my husband gets really hungry and he wants chicken wings, maybe, right? So he grew up here, he loves chicken wings, and he's like ravenous, just wants to just rip into those chicken wings and go to town. I always think of him when I see this painting because here he is. So here's my dad and my husband eating chicken wings. This was my dad's first time he ever had chicken wings in New York. And I always giggle when I see this painting because I always connect it to the two of them eating chicken wings, kind of in a frenzy, kind of hunger, animalistic, let's have that. Let's have dinner. But in all honesty, this painting is so much fun, and it's scary, and it's powerful. It's still powerful. Goya's works transcend time, ultimately.